Hey guys, if you're looking for content that's uncensored by big tech, make sure you hit that link in today's video description and become a Survival Dispatch insider and have access to some really great exclusive content. On today's special edition of Survival Dispatch News, we're talking with Dave Kemp and John Wheaton from the Tombstone Training Center and the Righteous Savage podcast about sudden violence, how to protect yourself and your loved ones. Dave Kemp and John Wheaton from the Righteous Savages podcast, and we're here at the Tombstone Gun Range and Training Center. First off, guys, you kicked off your first podcast. Tell us a little bit about the Righteous Savages podcast. Whoever wants to kind of explain what that is and what's going on with that.
Yeah, I'll jump off on that real quick. So basically, we're starting this podcast to try and encourage and motivate other guys to get out and be involved in all aspects of their life, as far as, being able to protect themselves, their family. We want to motivate people to be, essentially the best they can be, the best father, the best husband, the best protector. And we want to start this brotherhood of guys that get together, like-minded, hobbies, activities, beliefs, and try to really motivate each other to help each other out in all aspects of life, so that we can be, able to defend ourselves physically, spiritually, all aspects of our life, and trying from our experience, share that with other people to help them learn how to do some of this stuff a lot better and be the best they can be at that.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things is with men, women can engage by just having a conversation. I think men engage by actually doing things, by actually engaging physically. And so one of the things down the road that I know we want to do as an outgrowth of the podcast is to get men together, do some training together, do some activities where we're pushing each other and we're learning new things together. And so that's what we hope for the future. But right now we're really excited about the podcast and where it's going and the conversations we're going to ignite and start.
Yeah, and as an example of getting together, so we just wrapped up at Tombstone this weekend what we call a tactical weekend. And so it was 2 days worth of training. We did probably 6 or 7 different classes, handgun, rifle, tac, medic. Our last one, we did some vehicle dynamics. We did a cross-country tough gunner type of class. And in between all of that, it's cooking food, barbecue, burgers, whatever. It's campfires. It's
man stuff.
Yeah, a lot of times in classes, you show up, everybody's in a hurry. You do some drills. The instructors, screech out of there in a hurry, and you're left kind of like, I guess that was okay type of class. But we know in those instances, we like to kind of relax, spend time with each other, get to know each other, and really start to build a bond. And once you start getting just a little background and you get to know people, all of a sudden you feel a part of something. And that's really what we're trying to encourage.
All right, so guys, today we're talking about sudden violence and being prepared for sudden violence. And Dave and John, we've done, videos with you guys independently, but let's remind our audience how you guys came together.
Right. So I've run the gun range out here for 10 years now. My background is in law enforcement. I just retired after 29 years in law enforcement. And actually, me and John have some history that goes way back to like 2002.
We just discovered Saturday.
We'll talk about that in a different episode. But essentially, probably 3 years ago or so, John started coming out to the range like a lot of guys, interested in guns. He had bought some guns. He wanted to get into some training, wanted to start maybe focus on being an instructor. And just from him coming out to the range, also we went to the same church together. So we had a lot of contact, but we really weren't really doing a whole lot of stuff necessarily together. And through the course of doing classes and training, we began to get to know each other pretty good. And now we're pretty busy doing training and classes at the range and trying to basically, get that career going. And then also now doing the podcast.
Really, probably 2020 was where a turning point happened. I think it happened for a lot of people. You see the violence that's going on in just cities and in small towns. You're seeing all of these riots and the lockdowns and everything. It just really started making me think, I watch a lot of this stuff. I haven't done any real intense training and start to realize, man, when crap hits the fan, I probably should be able to handle myself, be confident in that. And so I came out. I'd come out to the range as just one day off every once in a while, and came out, got my membership, and befriended Dave and some of the other guys here, Chuck, and just started really developing myself as a shooter, learning how to intensify my training and how to build those things into my subconscious, so that I can, when bad things happen, I can be ready.
It's really interesting that you were talking about, you were recognizing, you know, the violence in the world. Our topic today is sudden violence and being prepared for sudden violence. You know, just recently, obviously, this is a timely subject because of the Hamas-Israel war. Not only Jewish folks are in danger, everybody's in danger these days. But I do want to I want to talk about Samantha Wall. She was a Detroit synagogue president, Jewish community leader. She was stabbed to death outside of her home in Detroit recently. A tragic event. Jewish institutions have been under threat, obviously, since the Hamas attacks in Israel. But really, everybody is subject to violence these days, whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, whatever you are, non-religious. Sudden violence is a real thing, right? Am I right, Dave?
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just, it gets really scary when you start to think about violence associated with religious beliefs, because that's a whole nother level of what we would have to fight. And thank goodness in America, you know, aside from some of those recent attacks, you really don't see that type of thing too often. But what you do see very often is just your standard run-of-the-mill criminal, you know, heroin, drug addict, whatever, that's desperate for money, decides they're going to go do a home invasion. Or believe it or not, there are people out there that still kick in doors and rape and sexually assault people. And I think for a lot of America, they just don't really believe those things really happen, even though they see it on the news. If you haven't experienced it yourself, you know, they say your experiences drive your beliefs. If it's never happened to you, you're probably never going to believe that it ever could really happen to you. If you've never had a flat tire, you probably don't care about what you need to fix a flat tire. And if you've never been physically assaulted or attacked, you might just think that that's just something on TV or the movies. So the very first step is somehow fully understanding that those things could actually happen to you someday. And you have to prepare for that first. They say that your body's never going to go where your mind has not gone first. And so you don't have to get, you know, attacked 10 times to finally believe it, but you do have to get your mindset right to get to the point where if something were to happen, you aren't so overwhelmed and shocked that you can't respond, that you're like, you know what, I figured this might happen someday and I'm prepared for it. And here's my plan. I'm going to focus on what I'm going to do and not be overcome by fear and just freeze up and shut down. And it all starts with your mindset at first.
I think that the mindset you don't necessarily have to be a cop to realize that there are bad things in the world that can harm you or can harm your family. I think that really just awareness of what's going on in the world. We have a lot of people that are not engaged in what's actually going on in the world. And because of that, they have a false sense of security. They think, man, I'm good. Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm going to go to my job. I'm going to get on my phone when I'm walking through the mall. I'm not going to pay attention to my surroundings.
Yeah, and often we're told what to believe.
Right, exactly.
What's that fear analogy? F-E-A-R?
False expectations or false evidence appearing real. It's just you've made something up in your mind of what you think the result is going to be. You know, so I talked before about the example of the abduction scenario where some guy comes up to a car, is trying to abduct a female with a knife or a gun, say, get in the car, don't scream, don't yell, I won't hurt you. And a lot of times the victims are so overwhelmed by fear that they don't know what to do. So they think their only option is just go with the person. And they think there's nothing they can do. And it's like, well, the only way I can escape this is if I somehow physically overpower the bad guy. And actually, that's not the solution to fix that problem. The solution is just resist, fight as hard as you can fight, run, scream, do whatever you can. And just the little bit of resistance is what solves the problem, because most of these dirt bags, they're just scared of getting caught. They don't want anybody to see. So you didn't have to physically overpower them. You just had to do what you decided to do. And sometimes our fear, these false expectations, set us up for failure. And we've just never thought it through before. So instead of being frozen and overwhelmed by a situation that you think you can't win, Don't focus on what you think the bad guy could do to you. Focus on whatever your plan is. If your plan of action is resist and yell and scream and hit your car alarm or whatever, when the stimulus happens to where you're about to get assaulted, then you just do those things. Focus on those things. And 95% of the time, that's what gets you out of that situation.
So talked about mindset. How important is physical training when you combine it with mindset and other types of training?
Right. I think you do have to have a basic fundamental level, some physical control tactics. Not that I probably in my whole law enforcement career, I don't ever remember going to a call where somebody was attacked or robbed on the street or they were about to be abducted and the victim said, hey, you know what, Officer Kemp, I did this one, jujitsu move and I put him in this hold and it allowed me to escape and that solved my problem. This one karate move fixed it. You don't see those things usually solve, those problems on the street. But having the confidence to know that you could handle yourself in most situations with some basic physical control tactics is enormous. All of a sudden, you don't become overwhelmed by fear when those things happen because you have some solutions in your back pocket. Like, here's a problem I'm having. Here's my options, A, B, and C. And one of those might be something to do with how you can physically defend yourself. So the confidence that builds is enormous. And, it's not like you're going to be facing getting abducted every day, but those are critical to have those tools available so that you know what, I do have options. There are some things I can do. And your answer isn't, I didn't know what to do. And so those things are critical. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to take a karate class for 10 years or any other type of martial arts, but just understand that those things are not quick fixes. If you decide, hey, I'm going to get into jiu-jitsu, and that's a great idea, you should. I highly recommend that. Just understand that it's just like getting into firearms training. A lot of people come to us and, hey, something happened at work, my boyfriend's, whoever family member is kind of off the rocker, I need a gun. And people think that just having the gun solves a problem. Some people think that going to one class solves a problem.
You say that because John's going to ask you, it seems like the logical next step is after you develop a mindset, have a little bit of physical fitness, is actual training. What do you see from the guys that come to your all's classes? Do they have that mindset already? Do they have that physical fitness already? Can you speak to that?
So I would generally say that most people, and we do a lot of concealed carry classes, and because of that, we see a lot of people that are coming in with just that mindset of like, I want to get a gun, I want to be able to carry it when I want to, but I'm not going to actively engage this training. I'm not going to really, I would say it's probably 80%, honestly, probably somewhere in that realm, that aren't going to post getting that concealed carry license. They're probably not going to carry a gun. They're not going to really engage in that. But we do have several people. In fact, we had some repeats from our last tactical weekend at this tactical weekend that we just finished. And those guys are really engaged. They want to learn how to train themselves when they're not here with an instructor. They want to take the next level of classes. They want to learn new things. And I think that is the key mindset to being able to be someone who is prepared for those bad situations. Not saying that you might get lucky, but I would generally say you need to go to multiple trainings to learn how to handle a firearm. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of things. I think every class that I've taken, I've learned something new. Every class that I've taught, I've learned something new. And so it's not just oh, I got my gun, I learned how to shoot it. It's a building block. You're building something, and it's a never-ending learning process.
And a real important aspect of being a coach, a trainer, a teacher is, and I talked about this the other night, is part of your job doing that is telling people what they don't want to hear.
Yep.
Oh, really? Like, what do you mean?
So I talked about this. So a famous quote from Tom Landry, former Dallas Cowboys football coach, said one of the most important aspects of being a coach is telling people what they don't want to hear. For example, you're not very good at this.
Yeah.
Who wants to hear that? Nobody wants to hear that. Or, hey, that gun you bought is a terrible decision. Well, what do you mean? I love this gun. The guy told me it was great and it's this color and I love it. it's important that we tell people the truth about what's going on so we don't set them up for failure. And a lot of people come out, they do kind of want a shortcut. They want to take the easiest
Yep.
route. Part of that is just getting a gun, and they think that's going to solve the problem. And part of our job as coaches and trainers is to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and say, hey, look, this is what you're really up against. We don't want to discourage you or convince you not to do this, but you also need to know what this is really about. This is going to be difficult on all kinds of levels, and it's a journey. You can't do this in one class in one day. You know, for law enforcement guys in Illinois, in order to carry a gun, you have to, at the beginning of your career, take a 40-hour firearms class, so 1 week firearms class. And I always ask my students, do you think 1 week of training with a firearm is good enough to be a cop? And the answer is usually no. Okay, well, what about 2 weeks? What about 80 hours? What about a month? Like, what's enough? And the answer is it's never enough. But for some students that come out, they want it to be one class because that's easy. They don't have to think about anything else. And so we do want people to just understand. And hopefully, even though they might come out and think, you know what, I just want one class, get this over with, get my certificate, get me down the road. While we have them hostage there for 8 hours, we're really going to try to give them the best information we possibly can and try to encourage them to continue this training down the road, because it's not a one-stop shop.
I have a friend who has a family member who is a Navy SEAL, and he told me a story about, he asked him, hey, when you guys get done training, do you guys have any rest time, any of that kind of stuff? He's like, no, we actually come back and we'll shoot 2,000 to 3,000 rounds with our handguns from 7 yards. Basic stuff. Because we never want to lose our edge when it comes to that. And I just heard this recently. It's like, wow, the best, we would consider them the best warriors probably on the planet, or some of the best warriors on the planet. They're doing the basic stuff when they come back from a mission. So that's what we're talking about in doing training. Always getting better at something.
Are you saying cops aren't the best warriors on
Let's speak to that term, righteous savage, how you guys came up with that real quick, and then we're going to dive in to get a little deeper.
Yeah, sure. So righteous does not mean at all that we are righteous, or we think we are, or we want everybody else to be. Not what it means. Righteous means doing the right thing. In the law enforcement world, we kind of use the term in certain situations like a righteous shooting or a righteous use of force. And it doesn't mean that somehow, it was religious. It just means it had to be done. It was the right thing. There was actually no other choice. We didn't have a checkbox mentality like, okay, the suspect had a weapon and they were close to me, so check these boxes and now I get to shoot somebody. It's different than that. It's, if you don't use this type of force, a victim is going to die. That's it. It has to be done. So righteous in our minds in this context is essentially doing the right thing for the right reasons. Savages, that part of the title refers to your soul, essentially. Some part inside of you has to be able to do some bad things to some bad people, perhaps. Not mean, not being a jerk. It just means that if you're fighting for your life, nothing is off the table. There really aren't any rules anymore. And you're fighting to save your life, your family's life, your kids. Your family doesn't want you dead. They don't want to have a funeral where they have to carry your casket. So what are you willing to do to stay alive? I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing to do some very ruthless, horrible things to people.
Yeah.
If it's righteous to stay alive.
Yeah.
And sometimes people really shy away from, they just want things to be easy and just hope that things go away. And just, if somebody's, trying to take your car from you, like, we can't hug people if you have a 5-year-old in the back seat and you're about to get carjacked. In moments in your life, at some point in time, you're going to have to take a stand. And part of that might be unleashing a lot of violence on somebody, but it's for the right reason. It has to be done. You're saving your kid's life. And at that point, nothing's off the table.
So you guys are both Christians. You're very strong in your faith and your spiritual lives. Let's talk about church. Let's talk about church security. It seems like a lot of churches could be a soft target for sudden violence. So let's speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. There's probably more violence in churches in America than there is in schools. And I know this is, I've researched it. If you looked up how many assaults and attacks in America happen, schools and school shootings is not number one, it's churches.
No kidding.
And it might not always be shootings, but there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of emotion. Sometimes you get people down and out. They come to the church, they need help, they need money, whatever. And if they're perhaps turned away, all of a sudden,
we're not even talking about terrorists.
No, we're just talking about some guy that lost his job, that has got kicked out of his house, is going through a divorce, needs $100 to help pay a bill, and maybe the church is like, nah, we can't help you. All of a sudden, emotions boil over and violence happens. Or maybe there's a couple going through a divorce and the wife's going to the church and the husband shows up and there's a fight. Those things happen all the time. Those types of attacks and assaults happen way more in churches than they do in schools, which is a little bit mind-blowing to some people. So it's not that,
I wouldn't even have thought that.
We don't think of church as a dangerous place, but the recipe is right for, it's kind of like having a tornado watch. It's like, we don't have tornadoes rolling through here all the time, but conditions are right for that stuff a lot of times. So it's definitely can be a place of violence, and churches need to be prepared for that. I think a lot of churches do pretty good these days. But kind of when you start getting into the smaller churches, maybe a congregation of 100 or 200 people, I guess sometimes, we get pastors coming to us from churches like that, and they just have no idea how to handle security in a sense because they're kind of doing it on their own. They don't have a lot of advice. And sometimes it's like, hey, cousin Fred wants to carry a gun and be our security guy. And the pastor or somebody feels bad. Like, well, I don't want to tell cousin Fred he can't. But are the people that you're getting involved, are they really capable of doing a good, effective job? And as a church board member or pastor, you have to have somebody on your team that's able to tell people the truth. Like, no, cousin Fred, we like you and we want you to keep coming to church here, but you can't be on the security team. You're 94. Like this, we love the fact that you want to help out, but you have to be able to tell people the truth when it comes to protecting lives in your church congregation. And so I see there's, that's a big hurdle for some people.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about church security and some of the things that congregations can do to be prepared for sudden violence. What's your opinion, John? Just like a basic starting point.
So I think that at least having your entrances and exits covered by somebody on a security team is very, very important. Having some kind of communication. Our church, which we go to a little bit bigger church, we actually have radio communication with the security team.
So do you have a security team?
Yes, we do. And I actually helped out with it for a little bit because I'm one of the worship leaders at the church. I play on the stage, and I'm always carrying a gun. So I can see things actually from the stage a lot of times that developing, or I could, we're not saying that anything's ever happened, but I could see things developing from a different perspective in that realm. I don't do much of that anymore, but that was something that we discussed. And I think that really awareness of what's going on, knowing the people that I think that church is a community, and knowing the people that are coming in and out of your church is very, very important too, especially for small churches. You've got some guy that's kind of weird start showing up to your church. It might be a good thing to discuss. Hey, how are we going to handle this if something happens? We just had a local pastor, very good friend of mine. He called me. I think we're going to have him on the podcast here before too long, but he actually had a serious death threat against him, and was carrying a gun while he was mowing his lawn. And the police were involved in keeping him safe throughout the week. And they had their church on high alert to make sure that the people that were possibly targeting the church, that they were aware of who those people were. When they came through the door, they would stop them. So I think that those are just some of the beginning things. I know from a police perspective, Dave's probably going to have some more details on that, but that would just be generally the first things that I would think of.
Yeah, I'd say in general, as far as church security goes, just break it down into sections. Most security that we set up for a detail, a VIP visit to your town from some congressperson or dignitary or president or whatever, you've got areas. You've got an inner circle, which in a church context might be pastor, congregation inside the church. Then you've got kind of like a middle area, which might be the lobby and offices and daycare and all that kind of stuff. And then you've got an outer perimeter, if you want to call it that, where you've got people looking at the parking lot and the front doors. And so you've got these different rings, and so you've got redundancy built in. And it doesn't take, a staff of 50 people to do that. And I also highly encourage having people, I know some churches that hire off-duty police to hang out in the parking lot. Like I said earlier, criminals, even the ones that are bent on shooting a lot of people, maybe it's a suicide operation, they want easy targets, and they're afraid of getting caught. Nobody wants to fight through resistance at the beginning of an attack or an assault. They want to do it almost anonymous, like nobody sees me, I can do what I want, there's no resistance. And just having a person, sometimes even just a civilian at the front door looking around, that's a deterrent, especially having, uniformed police officers standing around. I know a lot of churches that do that now, and it's like, well, do we really want cops in uniform at the front door of a church? I'm like, well, I don't know. Do you want to be scraping up 10 bodies from inside of your church? And that sounds like horrible to say. And people ask me about school security and school shootings. And if it was me, I would have the Marines in uniform at the front door of my school. Yeah. Like, well, that looks all militaristic. It's like, yeah, so what? We're not scraping up dead bodies. You can have 20 dead first graders in your school, like in Newtown, or not.
Talking about schools for a second, that's a very near and dear topic to me. My wife is a high school teacher. And so thinking about that, I think it's very important. In society, we protect the things that are most valuable to us with men with guns. And so, yeah, I agree with what Dave said. We should have armed guards out in front of the schools as a deterrent. Like the idea that we have thousands of veterans that have come back from a war just recently that are looking for a purpose. And I think, man, if we're going to send all of this money overseas, we should be funding the protection of our children, the most dear and near and dear to us. We should be protecting them. We can find some methods of protecting our schools better and keeping the bad guys out.
Yep. And armed guards and cops and military, that's not always the solution. That doesn't fix everything. Columbine in Colorado, they had an armed school resource officer at the school. So it does. Parkland, that doesn't always stop it. But here's the difference today. In our training in law enforcement, the training is very aggressive. And it's like, as soon as you get there, we're running into the school. And the perfect example was Nashville, the school in Nashville. Cops showed up, and within a couple of minutes, they are running through the school, chasing down bad guys and killing bad guys. And that's the difference is of what the capabilities are now. So you think, well, having an armed person there isn't just the solution, but if you have an armed person there that is motivated, that's the solution. That's the solution. And that's kind of the equalizer that's different today than 20 years ago.
So we talked about the deterrent of having that either that civilian person or that law enforcement person being visible as a deterrent outside. Talked about surveillance, communication. Now let's talk about training as it pertains to a church security team. How would you speak to that?
Yeah, so take this seriously. If you decide we're going to put a security team together, we've got some retired or still some cops going to our church. Let's get 4 or 5 guys and we're just going to name them. We're going to knight them as our security people. You have to go beyond that because this is complicated. You have a congregation of 100 or 200 or 1,000 people in your church, and now you've got 4 or 5 or 10 armed people in there. Like, what are the rules of engagement? If a guy shows up at the front with an AK-47, who's going to do what? Hopefully, you're talking about this stuff, and you can't just hope that somehow the armed guy is going to figure this out. It's very complicated. So you need to have somebody who can walk you through kind of the solutions for handling those problems. And that's where training, that's where classes come in. That's where doing some role playing and doing some actual hands-on training. So that way when it happens, it's really not the first time. You've been through it before. So it goes way beyond just picking some people to be a security team because they have guns. And it doesn't mean you got to go spend $1 million to get a bunch of crazy training, but you do have to go to some professionals at some point and get some advice on how this works in the real world and start there.
So, what about individuals being prepared for sudden violence outside the church doing your everyday thing? Let's talk to that a little
I
bit.
think that for me, just the way that I kind of approach it, if I'm out with my family, 90% of the time, if I'm away from where I can't carry a gun, like work, they don't allow me to carry a gun at work, unfortunately. But I'm carrying a gun almost, I would say 95% of the time. And when I go into a place, and this is just stuff I've learned, is I'm always aware of where the exits are or where multiple exits are. If I'm in a restaurant, I always want to face the entrance. I'll pick a booth instead of a table if possible, because that's a certain amount of concealment and cover that can protect, not great, but it's better than just being out in the open. And I'm going to look and I'm going to pay attention to the people coming in and out. Not be on my phone as much when I'm in public. I can do that when I'm at home.
That's a big deal.
Everybody's
on the phone.
Yeah, and honestly, it's hard. It's an addictive thing. You want to see, what's going on, and you've got a little bit of free time. Pull it out and try and get away from doing that kind of stuff when you're in public, because it takes your focus away from what's going on around you, and you can miss things.
Yeah, so situational awareness, right, Dave?
Yep, for sure. And mindset, like John said, sometimes you're in a place where you can have a gun, sometimes you're not. Well, if you can't take a gun to work, can you take a pocket knife? Well, yeah, if I can, that's a great tool to have handy with you. And even if you can't have anything at all, your mindset should be, if something horrible is going down here, I'm the guy that's going to solve this problem. I'm going to solve it with a level of savagery that no one has ever witnessed ever. And I don't run around thinking like I'm a tough guy. I do not. But it's almost like I feel like maybe God at some point is going to put me in a place and time where I can help somebody who can't help themselves. And that might be risky. My whole law enforcement job, you could probably describe it that way. But even if I didn't have any physical weapon on me at all, I still have the mindset of I am going to protect my family and innocent people as much as I possibly humanly can. And so there's obviously a lot to go in that. It's not just easy decisions like, oh, I'm going to fix every problem. And it doesn't mean you put a cape on and run around town trying to, be the hero and solve. There's a lot of things you need to not be involved in. When you see the fist fight in the Walmart parking lot, you need to keep on driving past that. Like, this is dumb. Like, we're not going to get in between people just fighting over a parking spot. Definitely not worth it. We don't need to, get involved in a road rage incident where somebody's flipping us off driving down the road. We do not need to solve that problem. We just need to leave that, avoid that problem. Even though if it looks like on the outside you've lost the argument or somebody's taking advantage of your driving privileges or whatever dumb thing, there's some things you need to analyze and realize this is not worth it. Even if it makes you look weak, even if it makes you look like you're not standing up for yourself, most of the time it's important just to walk away from that, if at all humanly possible. There'll be times for some people when it's not possible to walk away. Here's the question I have people ask themselves when they're trying to figure this out, because you could game plan 1,000 scenarios and try and memorize what to do all the time. You can ask yourself this one question and probably solve all these dilemmas. What are the consequences if I don't do anything right now? What are the consequences to me physically? And what are the consequences to other innocent people and society at large? If the answer is nothing, then we probably don't need to get involved. If the road rage incident is happening and the guy flips me off and is wanting me to fight, like, what if I don't do anything? What if I don't, argue back? Or what are the consequences? If it's nothing, then we're not getting involved. But if somebody's trying to kidnap your 4-year-old out of their bedroom window, what are the consequences if you don't do anything? It's horrible. We can't even speak to what the consequences would be for something like that. So in our training, we try to coach people through how to think through some of these problems, little questions like that. They can help solve a lot of problems like that in a hurry.
So you just dropped your first Righteous Savage podcast. I started listening to you. Just dropped it today as of the date of the taping of this video. John, where can people find you guys and the podcast?
So you can go to our website, righteoussavages.com. That has all the links. It even has a player that plays our current episode that's up. And you can follow us on social media. We drop a lot of little video content of training on the range and stuff like that. So follow us, share it with people. And on YouTube and Rumble is the two platforms that we'll use to drop the new episodes. But they'll be out to all the podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart. There's like 20 of them. But we'll be on all of those. And you can just follow along with us. We would love to have you be a part of the brotherhood that we're trying to build.
Awesome. Dave, final thoughts. Sudden violence. 30 seconds.
Assume that it can really happen. And if you think in your mind that it is actually possible for something bad to happen to you, then you will prepare for it. So your experiences drive your beliefs will then drive your actions, and your actions might be preparing, buying a gun, training, getting some training, getting in shape, taking some physical control tactics, the whole realm of self-defense beyond even just the firearm. Start looking at all of that and understand that there really is a possibility that you might need this, and it's important because it's not just for you, it's for your family as well.
Awesome. Guys, thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Denny. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.